Welcome back to the deep dive. If you've been tracking the AI landscape maybe over the last couple of years, well, the headlines have really been dominated by this singular pursuit of computational supremacy. Which model is faster, which one's smarter.
Right, it's all about the benchmarks.
Exactly. But when we look past those performance numbers and really dive into the infrastructure itself, we start to realize something. The future of AI isn't defined by just one massive quest.
No, it's really defined by two simultaneous and competing races happening right now.
That's the core idea we want to explore today.
It really is the crucial distinction you need to grasp. On one side, you've got the pursuit of massive centralized power. We're talking about the colossal large language models, the LLMs.
That's the bigger is better philosophy, right?
Pretty much. And it demands building these physical data center empires that, frankly, require immense resources. This race is all about concentration. Power, data, everything.
Okay, so that's one race. What's the other?
On the other side, you have the, let's call them architectural rebels, the specialized hyper-efficient challengers, the small language models, or SLMs.
And they're built differently.
Completely different philosophy. They're designed for decentralization, built to run right on your phone, your laptop, maybe your car, moving the intelligence out to the edge.
So this race is about distribution then?
Exactly. Concentration versus distribution. That's the heart of it.
So our mission for this deep dive today, it's really to move past the which model is smarter debate. We're not going to argue about who writes better poetry.
No, we need to analyze the profound strategic, economic, and maybe most critically, the environmental implications of this split. That's where the really interesting stuff is.
We're looking for those surprising trade-offs, maybe the hidden costs, the hidden benefits of each model that, they rarely make it into the usual performance reviews you read online.
That's the goal. Uncover those hidden layers.
Okay, let's unpack this dichotomy then. Just for everyone listening, we need some clear definitions. When we talk LLMs, what are we really talking about? Scale.
Yeah, scale and versatility primarily. LLMs are the big foundation models. They're characterized by just colossal size, think anywhere from tens of billions, maybe up to potentially trillions of parameters.
Trillions. That's hard to even picture.
It is, and this vast scale gives them that generalized power. They can handle diverse new tasks they haven't explicitly been trained on. But, and this is critical, their architecture requires those hyperscale, geographically centralized data centers.
So they need the giant server farms.
Absolutely. They're the dominant paradigm right now because, well, they were the first to show that true, complex reasoning capability at scale.
Got it. And the SLMs, then, they're sort of the engineered response to that dominance.
You could say that. They're defined by efficiency and specialization, typically clocking in much smaller, maybe a few 100 million parameters, up to perhaps 10 billion, maybe a bit more, but generally under that.
Much smaller scale.
Much smaller. And their whole design philosophy is built around decentralized on-device deployment. They exist to prove that, look, generalized size is often just overkill for many tasks.
So it's really a fundamental battle over where the computational power should actually live. In the cloud or on your device.
That's the essence of the architectural split. Okay, let's start with the current titan, the LLM paradigm, defined by that centralized power. The ambition, really, to achieve generalized intelligence through sheer size. Well, it's triggered an unprecedented infrastructural gold rush.
Yeah, and the economic implications are just massive.
Absolutely massive.
And massive barely covers it, right? I saw some projections. The scale required just to facilitate this model is mind-boggling. What was it, like $5.2 trillion?
That's the number. By 2030, a total of $5.2 trillion in capital expenditures globally just for AI-specific data centers.
Just think about that number for a second. It's like rebuilding the entire GDP of Japan over the next 6 years just to house and cool these AI servers.
And that spending is just to meet a projected global demand of 156 gigawatts of IT capacity.
156 gigawatts.
To service that kind of demand, you're literally looking at needing to restructure energy grids in multiple countries. This isn't just, a line item on a company's budget.
No, it's a commitment to reshaping global energy infrastructure.
Yeah.
For AI.
Precisely.
And we're seeing concrete examples of this scale right now, and they are honestly breathtaking. Can you detail some of these mega projects?
Sure. The most famous one, probably, is that highly ambitious OpenAI collaboration, the Stargate project.
Right, I heard about that. Started big, got bigger.
Exactly. Initially, they were targeting maybe $100 billion. Now, reports suggest it's expanded its scope. The projection is $400 billion.
$200 billion.
Aiming for 7 gigawatts of capacity spread across multiple U.S. states.
7 gigawatts. That's approaching the power output of dozens of conventional power plants, isn't it?
It really is. It's utility-scale power generation just for AI computation.
And let's put that $400 billion figure into strategic context. That's a $400 billion bet on the continued long-term necessity of centralized AI inference.
It's not just planning for next year. That's a 30 to 50-year infrastructure commitment.
Which means if the market shifts towards, say, more decentralized models, that investment becomes potentially the largest stranded asset imaginable, a huge liability.
That's the inherent risk in these long-term bets. And Stargate isn't unique. Look at the Vantage Frontier campus down in Texas.
What's happening there?
That's a $25 billion investment. They're constructing a 1.4 gigawatt mega-scale campus.
1.4 gigawatts. Still enormous.
Enormous. And these places aren't just big sheds with servers. They're specifically designed for the next generation of high-density, really heat-intensive GPUs. They are purpose-built factories churning out intelligence.
Okay, so this massive scale, it's intrinsically linked to the economic model behind LLMs, right? You said it works like a utility.
Correct. It functions like a classic 20th century utility. Think electricity or water. Intelligence in this model becomes a centrally produced, metered commodity. You access it via cloud APIs.
And you pay as you go.
Exactly. You, the user, pay based on consumption. For instance, using something like GPT-4 might cost you, 0.09 cents per thousand token request, roughly?
Okay.
This structure immediately concentrates economic power and, importantly, profit among the major cloud providers. The ones who own and maintain this colossal infrastructure, they control the source, the faucet.
Right. So if that's the centralized utility model, let's pivot. Let's talk about the SLM paradigm, decentralized efficiency.
Yeah.
How do these smaller models actually manage to perform without needing gigawatts of power? Is it magic?
Not magic, just some very clever engineering innovation. It's all about model optimization and compression. The feasibility of SLMs, it's fundamentally rooted in, I'd say, 3 main sophisticated techniques.
Okay, what are they?
These techniques allow them to sort of inherit knowledge from the bigger models and then run really efficiently on a hardware that has constraints, like your phone.
All right, technique number 1. Let's start with the one that sounds maybe the most academic. Knowledge distillation. What's that?
Knowledge distillation is fascinating. It's not just about making the model smaller by, chopping bits off. It's about transferring the nuance.
Transferring nuance.
You take the massive, powerful teacher model, the big LLM, and you train a smaller student model. But you don't just train it to mimic the teacher's final answer. No, you train it to mimic the teacher's internal thought process, essentially. Its complex probability distributions, its decision pathways along the way. You're transferring the core, distilled wisdom, but efficiently.
So it's like, instead of forcing the student to read the entire 1,000-page textbook, you teach them a really, really good summary that captures the essence.
That's a decent analogy, yeah.
But wait, if you're using the summary instead of the whole book, aren't you inevitably sacrificing some depth? Or maybe some complex edge case understanding? Are these SLMs secretly just a bit dumber but faster?
That's the critical trade-off designers are always managing. But the answer is increasingly often no, especially when the task is well-defined and focused. And the second technique helps here: quantization.
Quantization, what does that involve?
This basically reduces the numerical precision needed to store the model's parameters, its data. Instead of using, say, standard 32-bit floating point numbers, which take up a lot of memory.
Right, standard computer numbers.
You drop down to maybe 8-bit integers or even 4-bit integers in some cases.
Okay, lower precision numbers. Why does that help?
It makes the model much, much lighter. Small enough to run on something like a smartphone chip, which just doesn't have the memory bandwidth or the computational power for huge 32-bit operations at scale.
So it shrinks the model's footprint dramatically.
Exactly. Memory footprint shrinks and computation speeds up. Often, the impact on accuracy is minimal, or at least acceptable for the task. And because the model runs locally...
No network lag.
Right. The speed gain from eliminating that network latency usually outweighs any tiny loss in precision.
Makes sense. Okay. And the third technique was pruning. That sounds pretty straightforward, like trimming a hedge.
That's exactly what it is. Pruning involves systematically identifying and then just removing redundant or less important connections within the neural network.
So cutting out the dead wood.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Many of these large models are actually over-parameterized. They have connections that don't contribute much. Pruning simplifies the architecture without really compromising the core performance. It reduces the number of calculations needed.
So you combine distillation, quantization, and pruning.
And you get these highly optimized SLMs models in, say, the 7 billion parameter range can now deliver performance that often rivals much older models that were many times their size. It's really impressive engineering.
Okay, so the engineering makes them small and fast.
Okay.
How does that change the economic model compared to the LLM utility?
It flips it completely. Where LLMs are that metered utility, SLMs become intelligence as a product.
Intelligence as a product, meaning?
It means the intelligence is embedded directly into the hardware itself. The cost gets bundled into the price of your new iPhone or your smart car or your next laptop.
So you pay for the AI up front when you buy the device, not per query you make.
Exactly. You pay in the hardware CapEx, not through ongoing operational expenses via API calls.
And how does that shift market dynamics?
Well, potentially, it distributes economic power much more broadly. Instead of all the revenue flowing back to those few central cloud giants.
It goes to the device makers.
Device manufacturers, yes, and also decentralized software developers who build applications using these on-device models. It could foster a much wider ecosystem.
And there's a strong argument that SLMs are also a necessary market correction, right? Because using those huge LLMs for simple stuff seems wasteful.
It is. It's becoming increasingly clear. Academics, engineers, they've compellingly argued that using a, trillion parameter LLM for simple repetitive tasks like summarizing a short text message or maybe drafting a basic email reply, it's just an economically and computationally unsustainable misallocation of resources. It's using a supercomputer to do basic arithmetic.
Right. The SLM fills that massive efficiency gap for the everyday tasks.
Perfectly. It's the right tool for the right job.
Okay, but that LLM model, the centralized one, it wouldn't be commanding projections of, $5.2 trillion in CapEx if there weren't also massive upsides, right?
Yeah.
What's the fundamental appeal of that scale? Why the gold rush?
The primary justification really is the sheer versatility and the general reasoning power they offer.
General reasoning.
Yeah, because these LLMs are trained on such incredibly vast web-scale datasets, they capture intricate patterns, complex relationships, abstract concepts, things that smaller, more specialized models just cannot replicate.
So they're good at the hard stuff.
They excel at complex, often novel tasks that require deep contextual understanding. Think sophisticated summarization of long documents, advanced cross-disciplinary research, nuanced analysis of unforeseen situations.
And their ability to do transfer learning is a huge deal too, isn't it? That accelerates things across the board.
Absolutely massive accelerator for the whole industry because they have this extensive knowledge foundation from their pre-training.
Right. They've read the whole internet, basically.
Pretty much. So you only need to show them a few examples of a new task, what the industry calls few-shot, or sometimes even zero-shot learning.
And they can apply their knowledge.
Yes, they can successfully apply that vast knowledge to a new, specific task without needing a whole new training cycle. You don't have to gather and label a massive domain-specific data set every single time you want a new AI application.
That must dramatically lower the barrier for companies wanting to deploy AI for new uses. Less data needed up front.
Exactly. It significantly reduces the time and cost barriers for large-scale enterprise deployment.
Okay, so this technical prowess, the versatility, the transfer learning, that's what drives the economic engine we talked about. The forecast predicting AI could add trillions to global GDP by 2030.
That potential for transformative, generalized economic benefit, that's the justification you'll hear for every single dollar being sunk into projects like Stargate and its competitors.
But there's always a but. That immense scale, that centralized approach, it comes at a heavy cost.
Yeah.
And not just financially, right? We need to talk about the downsides of centralization.
Yes, absolutely. The costs in terms of market structure, transparency, ethics, they are significant. Let's look at that darker side.
Okay, first up, the prohibitive cost itself creates a classic tech problem, doesn't it? Centralization of power.
It creates a massive barrier to entry, let's be clear. Only a handful of the world's largest, best capitalized tech corporations can actually afford the hundreds of millions, maybe billions, required to train and deploy these state-of-the-art LLMs.
So it's a rich get richer scenario.
It becomes a powerful self-reinforcing feedback loop. The incumbents, the big players, solidify their dominance. They control access to the most powerful AI tools, and they set the rules for that access through their cloud platforms.
Which stifles competition.
It absolutely stifles competition and innovation outside of that established tech oligopoly. It's harder for startups or smaller players to compete at the cutting edge of foundation models.
Okay, barrier to entry. What else? There's the issue of opacity, right? The
Yeah.
black box problem.
Yes. When you have a system running on literally billions, maybe trillions of interconnected parameters,
Hmm.
you lose visibility into how it works.
The decision-making becomes opaque.
Exactly. It becomes exceedingly difficult, sometimes practically impossible, to interpret or explain why the model generated a specific output or why it reached a particular decision.
And that's not just a, philosophical curiosity. It has real-world implications.
It's a critical drawback in any high-stakes field where the rationale, the why, is non-negotiable.
Like medicine or law.
Precisely. Think about medicine. A doctor needs to understand the reasoning behind an AI's diagnosis suggestion before they can trust it with a patient's life.
Sure.
Or think about law. Legal precedent, the reasoning behind a ruling, that's everything. If the AI model can't provide an auditable, verifiable chain of reasoning,
Its usefulness is limited no matter how accurate it seems on paper.
severely limited in those domains, the lack of interpretability is a major roadblock.
Okay. And speaking of accuracy, we have to address the ethical and factual risks. These models learn from vast, often unfiltered datasets like the internet. That brings problems, starting with bias.
A huge problem. Since LLMs are trained on the unfiltered expanse of the internet, which, let's face it, is a mirror reflecting human history and language, warts and all,
They absorb our biases.
they inevitably absorb, reflect, and unfortunately often amplify existing societal biases related to race, gender, geography, you name it.
And we've seen studies showing this.
Oh yes, numerous studies have clearly demonstrated these models can perpetuate harmful stereotypes. And this poses a significant scalable risk when they're used in sensitive real-world applications.
Like deciding who gets a job interview or a loan.
Exactly. Automated hiring screenings, credit scoring, lending decisions. Deploying biased AI in these areas can have devastating consequences at scale.
And then there's the other famous, maybe often misunderstood flaw, hallucination. You hear that term a lot.
Yeah, and it's crucial to understand it's not really a bug that can just be patched out easily.
It's more fundamental.
It's a fundamental property of how these models work. They're probabilistic. They're designed to generate the most likely sequence of words, given the context they've seen.
So they prioritize sounding plausible.
Exactly. They're engineered to be fluent and plausible sounding, which means occasionally they'll generate outputs that sound perfectly reasonable, but are entirely factually incorrect or just disconnected from reality, making things up, essentially.
And that's not just a funny quirk when ChatGPT tells a weird story.
Mm.
It can have serious consequences if people rely on that plausible sounding output without checking.
Very serious. We've already seen this play out in the real world. Remember that case with the law firm?
The one that got sanctioned?
Yes. Sanctioned by a federal court because they submitted a legal brief containing entirely fictitious case citations, case law that simply didn't exist.
And the LLM just made them up.
Made them up, but presented them fluently as if they were real. That's a stark warning. As these incredibly powerful models get integrated more deeply into critical workflows and infrastructure.
The risk of generating scalable, hard-to-detect misinformation becomes a major systemic concern for businesses, for governments, for everyone.
It's a fundamental challenge we have to manage. Okay, so now let's explore the countermovement. The rise of the SLM ecosystem, which, as we said, fundamentally changes the strategic calculus by focusing all its strength out there on the edge.
Right, the decentralized approach. What are the big strengths here? The most immediate one seems to be democratization, making AI more accessible.
That's a huge one. By dramatically cutting the computational power and memory needed, SLMs radically lower the cost barrier for deploying genuinely cutting-edge AI.
So it's not just the big tech giants anymore.
Exactly. It's a massive shift. Instead of being locked into paying an API fee per query to one of the handful of major providers,
Smaller companies can play.
smaller organizations, startups, even individual developers can now realistically deploy sophisticated models on standard commodity hardware. Your laptop, your phone.
That moves high-end AI capabilities beyond just the corporate behemoths. It should foster a much healthier, more competitive ecosystem, right?
That's the hope, and arguably the reality we're starting to see. More innovation from more places.
But maybe the single most compelling argument for decentralization for SLMs is privacy and security. That seems massive.
It's paramount for so many applications, since SLMs run locally, right there on your device.
Your data doesn't leave.
Your sensitive data, personal messages, maybe your medical records, proprietary corporate information, it never needs to leave the local environment. It doesn't get sent over a network to some distant centralized cloud server owned by someone else.
Which is huge for things like GDPR compliance in Europe, or just general corporate risk management. You're not sending customer data out.
Absolutely, and it fundamentally shifts the trust paradigm. In the LLM world, all that user data aggregated in the cloud becomes this massive, attractive target for breaches. It's a huge corporate liability.
Whereas with SLMs,
The intelligence comes to the data, which stays local. That data remains, essentially, a personal asset under the user's control or within the company's secure perimeter. That shift alone is incredibly disruptive.
yeah, I could see that. Data as an asset, not a liability. What about performance? Beyond privacy.
Operationally, SLMs offer superior speed and reliability in many cases.
How so?
Well, by eliminating that network round trip, the time it takes for your query to travel to the cloud data center and for the answer to come back,
You cut out the latency.
you drastically reduce latency. And
Yeah.
that's absolutely critical for any real-time application. Think about instant virtual assistants on your phone or live translation happening as someone speaks.
Milliseconds matter there.
They absolutely do. You need that instant response.
Plus, they work offline, right? That seems like a big advantage, too.
Huge advantage. If your SLM is running on your phone or your laptop, you retain full AI functionality even when you're offline on an airplane, in a remote area with bad signal during a network outage. The intelligence is resilient. It's always available.
Okay, so privacy, speed, reliability, offline access. What else? Are they actually better at certain tasks?
Yes, they can be. While LLMs are the broad generalists, SLMs can excel as specialized athletes.
Meaning?
When you fine-tune an SLM on a very specific focused data set, say, for analyzing complex legal contracts in a particular jurisdiction, or maybe performing fault diagnosis on a specific type of industrial machinery,
Yeah.
it can often achieve higher accuracy on that narrow, domain-specific task than a big generalist LLM. The generalist might get confused by the niche jargon or the specific context, whereas the specialist SLM is trained precisely for it.
So specialization can beat generalization for certain jobs.
Often, yes.
And there was one more point you mentioned about global digital equity.
Yeah.
The linguistic advantage.
Ah, yes, that's crucial. The lower resource requirements of SLMs make it far more economically and computationally feasible to train effective models for the thousands of underserved languages around the world.
Languages that the big LLMs often ignore.
They tend to ignore them or support them poorly because the cost of gathering and processing the massive training data needed for a trillion-parameter model in a low-resource language is just prohibitive. It doesn't make economic sense for the big players.
But for SLMs, it's achievable.
Much more achievable. SLMs offer a realistic path toward genuine linguistic inclusivity in AI, bringing powerful language tools to communities currently left behind.
Okay, lots of strengths. But miniaturization always comes with trade-offs. We can't pretend scaling down doesn't impose limits. What's the ceiling for SLMs? What can't they do well?
The primary ceiling is really the complexity of reasoning they can handle. Because they're trained on smaller, more focused data sets, their knowledge base is inherently narrower.
So they struggle with.
They struggle significantly with highly abstract reasoning, the kind of creative generation that requires combining diverse, distinct concepts in novel ways or tasks that fall completely outside their specific, focused domain of expertise.
They're less creative,
Yeah.
less able to think outside the box.
Generally, yes. They typically lack those surprising emergent capabilities we sometimes see in massive LLMs.
Emerging capabilities, like what?
Like the unexpected, sophisticated behaviors, maybe the spontaneous ability to write complex poetry or understand subtle humor or tackle high-level mathematical problems that only seem to arise when you cross a certain threshold of massive scale and data.
So SLMs don't usually surprise you with new skills they weren't trained for.
Not typically, no. For that true high-level abstraction, for synthesizing diverse, novel information, for really open-ended creativity, they still underperform their larger counterparts.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about managing them? Is there a complexity there?
That's a really important practical point. While deploying one SLM is cheap and simple, managing and updating a vast fleet of diverse, specialized SLMs across an entire organization's hardware.
So thousands of different models on thousands of different phones, laptops, machines.
Exactly. That can introduce its own significant layer of managerial complexity. You have version control, updates, security patching, ensuring compatibility. The integration overhead can become substantial.
So paradoxically, the cost and complexity of managing that huge fleet of SLMs might, in some cases, actually outweigh the simplicity and cost savings of just paying for access to one central, versatile LLM API from a cloud provider.
It's a calculation every organization has to make. The efficiency gains of SLMs are real, but the potential managerial overhead for large-scale, diverse deployments needs to be factored in very carefully. It's not always simpler in practice.
Okay, this brings us to a critical part of the discussion, where this split between LLMs and SLMs moves beyond just economics or strategy and really hits planetary consequences, sustainability.
Yes. And the central sustainability challenge here is a genuine, really difficult conflict. There's no easy answer. We have to weigh the high operational footprint of the centralized LLMs
The energy and water they use constantly.
against the high embodied footprint of the decentralized SLMs.
The resources used to make all the devices they run on.
Exactly. Neither pathway is automatically a simple green choice. It's a complex trade-off.
All right, let's break it down. Start with the data center environmental toll, the ongoing operational impact of the LLM world. These facilities are thirsty, aren't they?
Incredibly demanding. They are, quite simply, voracious consumers of electricity. Global electricity consumption just from data centers is projected to more than double by 2030.
Super.
More than double, putting immense pressure on local electricity grids wherever they concentrate.
And there was that figure for the U.S.
Yeah, Goldman Sachs forecasts that data centers alone will account for a staggering 8% of total U.S. energy usage by 2030.
8%, just for data centers. That is a monumental slice of the national energy pie for a single sector.
It really is. And think locally. A single large hyperscale data center can consume as much electricity as 50,000 homes.
50,000 homes.
So when you build several of these in one area, like Northern Virginia or parts of Europe, that immense concentrated power strains the local grid and can directly contribute to rising utility costs for everyone else nearby.
Okay, energy consumption is huge, and that translates directly to carbon emissions, obviously.
Directly. Since many grids around the world still rely heavily on fossil fuels, even with companies buying renewable energy credits, the actual grid mix often isn't fully green.
Right.
The training of just a single large AI model can emit as much carbon as, get this, 5 gasoline-powered cars over their entire lifetimes.
Wow. One model training run equals 5 car lifetimes.
That's the scale of the carbon costs for training the biggest models. And we're seeing major tech companies like Amazon, Google, already reporting verifiable increases in their corporate emissions, their Scope 1 and 2 emissions, tied directly to this rapid data center build-out.
It's showing up on their carbon balance sheets.
It is.
Okay, energy and carbon. But the cost goes beyond that. The conversation about water usage, that seems perhaps even more sensitive, especially in areas already facing water stress.
It's incredibly sensitive and a growing point of conflict. Most large data centers rely on evaporative cooling systems.
Which use water to cool the air.
Exactly, and they are absolute sponges for fresh water. A single large data center can use up to 5 million gallons of fresh water per day.
5 million gallons a day? That translates to, what, almost 1.8 billion gallons a year?
That's right, 1.8 billion gallons annually for one data center.
That amount of water, it's equivalent to the daily water consumption of a small city, isn't it? Like down to maybe 10,000 to 50,000 people?
Easily. So when these facilities locate in water-scarce regions, they are directly competing for a vital resource with local agriculture, with municipal needs, with ecosystems. It's not sustainable.
And we're seeing real-world impacts. You mentioned Northern Virginia.
Acutely. Northern Virginia has become the world's biggest data center hub. And between 2019 and 2023, the collective water consumption of those facilities increased by a staggering 63%.
63% increase in just 4 years.
When you introduce a concentrated industrial water user of that magnitude into a region, the community consequences on water tables, on resource allocation are immediate and severe.
And what's really fascinating, maybe quite concerning, is the evidence suggesting the industry knows just how sensitive this issue is.
They are deeply aware. There were leaked internal documents from Amazon, for instance.
What did they show?
They specifically revealed a strategic goal within the company to report only a fraction of their actual water usage publicly. Why? To mitigate what they explicitly called reputational risk.
Wow. So actively trying to downplay the numbers because they know it looks bad.
It shows they understand that local water stress is a major social and regulatory flashpoint. They know it's a vulnerability.
Okay. High operational costs for LLMs. Energy, carbon, water. Now let's pivot to the other side of the ledger. The device environmental toll. The embodied footprint associated with the SLM future.
Right. The SLM future relies on the proliferation of literally billions of consumer electronic devices, smartphones, laptops, IoT gadgets, cars, and this is where the environmental cost is paid up front in the manufacturing.
And the key stat here is that the production phase, the manufacturing, accounts for the vast majority of a device's lifetime carbon footprint, right? Something like 80%.
Around 80%, yes. That is such a critical number for listeners to internalize.
80%. So the overwhelming majority of the environmental damage from your phone or laptop is done before you even turn it on for the first time.
Exactly. This massive upfront carbon cost stems from two main things. The energy-intensive mining required to extract over 60 different materials.
Like lithium, cobalt, rare earths.
All those critical minerals. And second, the complex global manufacturing processes needed to make the chips, the screens, the batteries, everything else. It's incredibly energy-intensive.
And that impact gets multiplied relentlessly because of the sheer scale and the short life cycles of these devices. How many phones are out there?
Globally, estimates are over 8.5 billion mobile phones currently in circulation.
8.5 billion.
And that impact is magnified by these really short consumer replacement cycles. In many markets, people replace their phones every 2 years, sometimes even less.
So we're constantly demanding new devices.
This constant, often engineered churn creates perpetual demand for new raw materials, new mining, new manufacturing energy. It just accelerates that embodied carbon burn rate.
Which leads us directly to the inevitable consequence of all this churn. The e-waste crisis.
A massive, growing global problem. E-waste is officially the world's fastest growing solid waste stream.
How much are we talking about?
In 2022 alone, 62 million tons of e-waste were generated globally.
62 million tons. And how much gets recycled properly?
That's the shocking part. Only about 22.3% of that was formally collected and properly recycled. The vast majority isn't.
So where does it go by landfills?
Landfills, or worse. And when e-waste ends up in landfills, it leaches toxic heavy metals, lead, mercury, cadmium, things you really don't want in the environment, into the ground and potentially into the water table.
And the scale of that leaching is significant.
Get this. A shocking 70% of all the heavy metals found in U.S. landfills are estimated to originate from discarded electronics.
70% from e-waste. That's incredible.
It is. And we absolutely have to mention the social justice dimension here, too.
The export issue.
Yes. A significant portion of e-waste, particularly from wealthier nations, is illegally exported to developing countries. There, often in the informal sector, workers, sometimes including children, attempt to extract the valuable metals like copper and gold without any safety gear or proper facilities.
Exposing themselves to incredibly hazardous substances.
Exactly. It creates severe public health crises and environmental damage in those communities. It's exporting our waste problem onto vulnerable populations.
Okay, so the central tension is stark. LLMs, concentrated recurring operational impact energy and water burn. SLMs, massive, distributed, upfront, embodied impact from manufacturing, plus the downstream e-waste crisis. Neither is clean.
It's a genuine dilemma.
But let's look at the operational efficiency again, just running the models day to day. Because SLMs do offer a clear quantitative win there, right? In terms of energy per task.
Oh, absolutely. On a per-task basis, the difference can be dramatic. That UCL experiment you mentioned earlier provided a really clear quantitative benchmark.
What did you find?
They found that for common tasks like translation and summarization, a well-tuned SLM consumes somewhere between 15 and 50 times less energy than a comparable LLM doing the same job.
15 to 50 times less energy. That's a game changer for high-volume, everyday AI tasks.
It really is. That reduction is spectacular. In one specific case they cited, the energy needed for a task plummeted from 0.112 watt-hours using the LLM down to just 0.003 watt-hours using the SLM.
0.112 down to 0.003. That's doing the math quickly,
Hmm.
over a 97% reduction in energy use.
Over 97%. And often they found it achieved equivalent or sometimes even better accuracy for that specific domain task.
Wow. Okay.
So the conclusion on sustainability becomes really clear, if complicated. The trade-off is between that concentrated recurring energy and water impact of centralized LLMs, the constant operational burn.
Versus the massive distributed upfront carbon and material burden of decentralized SLMs, which the planet effectively repays every single time you buy a new device because of those short replacement cycles and the resulting e-waste.
It's operational impact versus embodied impact. That's the core environmental conflict.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly now to strategic foresight. Thinking about the financial consequences of this efficiency race, if SLMs really do win that efficiency war and start dominating most routine AI tasks, we need to talk seriously about the risk of stranded assets for the big cloud giants.
This is arguably the single biggest financial risk looming over the current LLM-centric economic model.
Why? Because of those huge investments we talked about.
Exactly. Those specialized AI data centers, the Stargates and Vantages, they are incredibly expensive, long-lived assets. They're typically planned financially for 30 to 50-year operational lifespans just to recoup the immense capital investment poured into building them.
Okay, long payback period.
Right. Now, what happens if SLMs rapidly take over the vast majority of simple, high-volume inference loads, which, let's be honest, is the bulk of the current AI market volume?
The demand for the big, expensive cloud processing drops off.
The demand for that expensive, centralized GPU processing power could erode much, much faster than the initial investors anticipated.
Suddenly, those multi-billion-dollar data centers, maybe even the proposed $400 billion Stargate project,
Yeah.
they become significantly underutilized or devalued long before their planned economic life is actually over.
That is the textbook definition of a technological transition risk. It's directly analogous to what the fossil fuel industry is facing with the shift to renewable energy.
Same dynamic. Assets built for one reality facing a disruptive new one.
Precisely. Investors deployed, or are planning to deploy, trillions of dollars based on the foundational assumption of continued growing demand for centralized AI inference. But SLMs offer this disruptive, cost-optimized alternative that fundamentally shifts that demand away from the cloud and onto the consumer's own device.
So this uncertainty must be putting immense pressure on the market valuations of companies heavily invested in building out this centralized AI infrastructure.
Huge pressure. It challenges the core economic assumptions underpinning the entire cloud-based AI model.
But these massive, expensive data centers, they don't necessarily have to become colossal ghost towns, right? Especially given how much energy and material embodied energy is already sunk into constructing them. What are the pathways to save that investment or at least repurpose that capacity?
That's the key question for those investors. One strategy is adaptive reuse. These buildings are unique.
How so?
They have massive power inputs, incredibly robust fiber connectivity, sophisticated cooling systems already built in. They might be perfect candidates for conversion into other high-tech applications.
Like what?
Maybe advanced vertical farming, certain types of specialized manufacturing that need clean rooms and heavy power, perhaps biological research laboratories. The goal is to preserve the original structure's embodied energy and minimize demolition waste by finding a new, high-value use.
Okay, adaptive reuse is one option. But maybe the most likely or rational path is pivoting these facilities into something more specialized within the AI ecosystem itself, like hybrid hubs.
I think that's the most probable scenario. They stop being these general-purpose inference farms handling every simple query that comes along. Instead, they become specialized heavy industry backbones for the AI world.
Heavy industry backbones, what does that mean?
It means their immense centralized power gets repurposed specifically for the tasks that genuinely require that scale, tasks that can't be done efficiently at the edge.
Such as?
Well, first and foremost, they become dedicated training centers for the next generation of even more sophisticated LLMs, and also for training the SLMs themselves. Training remains an incredibly compute-intensive, high-cost, centralized activity.
Okay, so training stays central. What else?
Second, they could serve as massive, secure dataset repositories, holding and managing the enormous datasets needed for AI development.
Data storage and training hubs.
And third, they handle that small percentage of highly complex, specialized, maybe escalated reasoning tasks that the SLMs out at the edge simply cannot handle. The really abstract, highly novel queries that need the power of a foundation model.
So they remain vital, but their role shifts dramatically from being the everyday utility provider to being the specialized industrial powerhouse for the really tough jobs.
Exactly. Their role narrows, becomes more specialized, but potentially still very valuable.
And what about facilities that truly become technologically redundant? Maybe older ones or ones poorly located for these new roles. What happens then?
For those, the focus has to shift towards sustainable decommissioning, sometimes called IT asset disposition or ITAD.
And that's more than just demolition.
Oh, much more. It's about turning the disposal process itself into a capital recovery and environmental mitigation operation. The focus shifts entirely to maximizing the resale and reuse of valuable, energy-intensive components. Things like high-end GPUs, servers, specialized cooling equipment, power distribution units, finding a second life for them on the secondary market.
So you recover some capital for the investors.
You recover capital, yes, but crucially, you also contribute to the circular economy by extending the functional life of all that hardware. It helps mitigate some of that sunk environmental cost embodied in making those components in the first place. It's about maximizing value recovery and minimizing waste.
Okay, so pulling this all together, we've established pretty clearly that this isn't really a zero-sum battle where one model type wins and the other disappears. The most efficient, the most rational future seems to be a symbiotic, hybrid LLM, SLM ecosystem.
That technological hybridity seems almost inevitable, I agree. You'll have SLMs handling the vast majority of local, latency-sensitive, everyday tasks right on the device.
Doing the heavy lifting volume-wise.
Exactly. And then you'll have the LLMs, likely residing in those repurposed hybrid hubs, handling the initial training of all models, ensuring security and oversight, and dealing with that small fraction of really high-level abstract queries that need centralized power.
Makes sense. The right tool for the job, distributed appropriately.
But for that hybrid future to be truly sustainable, we need more than just technological convergence. We need a proactive, dual-pronged investment thesis on the sustainability front. Meaning the focus has to shift. We need to stop debating which model type is inherently better or greener and start asking, how do we make the entire ecosystem sustainable? And that means addressing the primary environmental weakness of both systems simultaneously.
Okay, a two-pronged approach. Let's break that down. Goal number one would be?
Goal 1, decarbonizing the centralized core LLMs. This is all about tackling that massive operational impact we discussed, the huge energy and water strain from the data center.
Right. How do we do that?
First, a serious, verifiable commitment to renewable energy procurement. And I mean, going beyond just buying carbon credits or unbundled renewable energy certificates, which can be controversial.
What's needed instead?
Corporations need to directly fund new, additional renewable energy projects, things like dedicated solar farms, wind farms, geothermal plants, ideally through mechanisms like power purchase agreements, PPAs, that guarantee the energy feeds the grid powering their data centers. This actually helps decarbonize the grid itself, detaching the AI sector from reliance on legacy fossil fuels.
Okay, genuine renewable energy. What about the water crisis? That seemed critical.
Absolutely critical. We need significant investment in advanced cooling innovation, specifically focusing on developing and deploying low water and ideally waterless cooling systems at scale.
Like immersion cooling.
Immersion cooling is a great example, where servers are submerged in non-conductive fluids. These systems can dramatically reduce or even eliminate the reliance on evaporative cooling towers that consume billions of gallons of fresh water. That's crucial for easing the strain on local water supplies, especially in stressed regions.
Makes sense. Anything else for the centralized core?
Yes, turning a major waste product into a resource. Waste heat reuse. Data centers generate enormous amounts of low-grade heat consistently.
All those servers run hot.
Exactly. We need to invest in the infrastructure, the pipes, the heat exchangers to capture that vast amount of waste heat and repurpose it.
What?
For things like district heating systems, warming nearby residential buildings, offices, even greenhouses. This converts a massive energy liability, something they currently spend energy getting rid of, into a valuable community resource. It improves overall energy efficiency significantly.
Okay, so decarbonize the core. Renewables, water-wise cooling, waste heat reuse. Now, what's the second prong of the strategy?
Goal 2. Building a circular decentralized edge, SLMs. This side tackles the embodied impact, the manufacturing footprint, and the e-waste crisis driven by all those billions of consumer devices.
Right, the phones, the laptops. How do we address that? The first step has to be attacking those short replacement cycles. Right?
Absolutely. We need fundamental investment in sustainable product design. That means designing electronics from the ground up for longevity, durability, and especially repairability.
Making things last longer and easier to fix.
Yes, and employing modularity, so maybe you can upgrade just the camera or the processor in your phone instead of replacing the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's about challenging the current linear take, make, dispose consumption model that drives so much waste.
Countering planned obsolescence, essentially.
Precisely, and that sustainable design philosophy ties directly into needing better advanced materials and recycling technologies.
How so?
We need much more efficient and economically viable technologies for high-value material recovery from e-waste. We need to get better at extracting not just the gold and copper, but also the critical rare earth elements, the cobalt, the lithium, and safely managing the toxic heavy metals. We need to turn e-waste from a hazardous burden into a valuable resource stream for new manufacturing.
Closing the loop. Making recycling truly effective and profitable.
That's the goal. And to make that happen, you need the physical network to support it. Robust reverse logistics infrastructure.
Reverse logistics, meaning getting the old stuff back.
Exactly. Building the global networks required for the efficient collection, the secure data wiping and refurbishment, and the high-value resale of used electronics. This infrastructure needs to be properly funded and incentivized to turn e-waste from this rapidly growing liability into a profitable managed asset class. It's about making reuse and refurbishment easy and desirable.
Okay, sustainable design, better recycling, reverse logistics. But for that scale of change to really happen across the entire electronics industry, surely policymakers have to step in. This won't just happen on its own.
They absolutely must step in. Voluntary corporate initiatives are good, but often not enough. We need clear, binding regulations, particularly extended producer responsibility, EPR legislation.
EPR, what does that do?
EPR laws essentially hold the electronics manufacturers, the Apples, the Samsungs, the Dells, financially and often logistically responsible for collecting and recycling their products at the end of their useful life.
So the company that makes the phone has to pay for recycling it later.
Correct. Or manage the system. This legislative lever is incredibly powerful because it creates the necessary economic incentive for those manufacturers to design products from the beginning that are inherently more durable, easier to repair, and simply and cheaper to recycle. If they know they'll bear the end-of-life costs, they'll design smarter upfront.
So EPR forces them to internalize the environmental cost, driving better design and ensuring that embodied carbon investment is paid back over a much longer, more useful product lifespan.
That's exactly the mechanism. It's a key policy tool for driving circularity.
Okay, let's try to summarize this deep dive then. We've really tracked two colossal, competing technological forces, each with a significant environmental shadow.
On one side, you got the centralized LLMs, characterized by that concentrated, high-volume operational burn, demanding immense power grids and sucking up freshwater resources constantly.
And on the other side, the decentralized SLMs, whose promise of efficiency relies on a massive, distributed, embodied impact, the manufacturing burden of billions of devices, the mining for materials, and the looming e-waste crisis fueled by short life cycles and toxic leaching.
And the key takeaway is that a truly sustainable AI future, this hybrid future we envision, it depends not just on clever breakthroughs in the code, in algorithms like distillation and quantization,
but just as much on innovation in the physical world.
Exactly. Innovation in concrete for greener data centers, in water management technologies, in sustainable product design, in global recycling infrastructure, and fundamentally in building a truly circular economy for electronics. The software and hardware sustainability have to advance together.
We started this conversation by discussing the two economic models, intelligence as a metered utility from the cloud versus intelligence as an embedded product you own on your device.
Right. The utility versus the product.
So given that this strategic shift towards more efficient SLMs could genuinely threaten the economics of those massive centralized data centers, here's a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over.
If AI intelligence increasingly becomes just an embedded feature within your phone or your car, something owned and controlled locally by you, running on your hardware rather than a metered utility you access constantly from a central corporation,
how fundamentally does that change the relationship, the power dynamic between you, the consumer, the company that made your device, and those giant tech platforms that currently control the AI cloud?
Is it possible that the enhanced privacy and the local control benefits that come with decentralized SLMs, could that be the real long-term disruptive force here? Maybe even more profound, ultimately, than the energy or water sustainability benefits we spent so much time discussing today.
That fundamental shift in control over intelligence.
Yeah.
That's the deeper strategic implication we all really have to grapple with
Yeah.
as this next, potentially much more distributed face of AI unfolds around us. Lots to think about there.